Hey guys, so I am back with another history video because I had a lot of fun talking about knights, and so I thought that today I would talk about another one of my favorite topics in history, which is not as fun as knights, objectively. Um, it's a little bit more sinister, if you will. So today I thought I'd talk about the Black Death. First of all, I just want to apologize for my appearance because it's finals week, or it's about to be finals week, and I'm doing the best I can. So this is what you get. Also, I always yawn during these videos, so we're just gonna have to roll with it. So yeah, today I want to talk about the Black Death, and I have my notes, as I did last time. This one will not be a whole hour-long rant like the night one was, because I am tired and I want to go to bed. But I wanted to talk about this because I think it's a lot of fun. So, what is the Black Death? It was a plague in medieval Europe in the 12th century, and that's pretty much the main sort of gist of what people know about it. That and the fact that it was spread by rats. So, the bacteria that causes the plague is called Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis. And that's the name of the bacteria. The name of the disease that it causes is plague. Okay, so you've got Yersinia pestis, that's the bacteria. Then you've got plague, which is the disease, if that makes sense. And then the Black Death is what this particular outbreak of plague is called. So plague has popped up many times throughout human history. It's popped up in like the Neolithic era, the Justinianic plague, which was a devastating epidemic from 541 to 545 CE. That was an outbreak of plague. Then you've got the Black Death, which is 1347 to 1353. That's what we're talking about again. And then there was another outbreak in 1894 in Hong Kong. So, how do we know that these are all the same disease? Especially when you're looking at ancient bodies, they have no DNA left. How do you know that all these people died of plague? Well, we can look at teeth. Teeth are the only bone with an active blood flow when the person is alive. So even after a person dies, there is remnants of the blood in the teeth. And that is how we know that people died of the plague, even if their bodies are, just bones, just like tossed in a grave, and it's not specified how they died. That's how we can figure it out. So, Yersinia pestis, that plague-causing bacteria, it likes to live in the bodies of mountain rodents. That is very specific. It likes altitude, and it likes rodents who live in high places. So, we've got things like Tibetan marmots, and squirrels, and chipmunks, and prairie dogs. I live in Arizona. We have a couple of cases of plague every year in northern Arizona because people get close to the prairie dogs, and the prairie dogs carry plague. So if you are ever really anywhere that's high altitude, don't touch any damn rodents because you could get the plague. So it is very much still a disease that is active today, so be aware of that, and don't let your dogs get close to mountain rodents, anything like that. So we've got that. Oh my god. One of these days I'll stop yawning every 30 seconds. So now I've got types of plague. There are a few. So we've got the bubonic plague, which is the most commonly known one, and that attacks the lymph nodes. And that one is passed from animals to humans. Then we've got the pneumonic plague, which attacks the lungs, and this one is spread human to human through respiration. Then you've got the septicemic plague, which is the infection in your blood, and that's also animal to human. That's like more so if you like get like bitten, if that makes sense. And then you've got the gastrointestinal plague, which is an attack on the stomach. And really, you will only get this if you eat meat that is infected by plague. So, unless you're eating like cooked squirrel, I don't really think you'll have a problem with that. And then the overall mortality rate for the plague in the 12th century was about 40 to 60% of the population. So an enormous chunk of humanity just got absolutely decimated by this disease. So we know the basics. We know how it's spread. We know who carries it. We know how deadly it is. It's bad. And now we need to consider, right? How does this happen? How did this come around? So, wild rodents, right? Those marmots, those squirrels, those prairie dogs. In the case of this outbreak, it was like Tibetan marmots, so like Central Asian rodents. And they made contact with what we call commensal rodents, which are rodents that live in human populations, so your rats and mice, vermin, as we would call them. And when these wild rodents make contact with these commensal rodents, they swap fleas, and that is where the disease comes from. And that's how it gets from these Tibetan marmots to human beings. So, the disruptions of wild rodents, like climate change or change in habitat loss, natural disasters, the clearing of land for farming, that is what displaces those wild rodents and makes them move into more populated areas, if that makes sense. So, for example, if you're clearing a whole bunch of land for housing and farming, the wild, like, especially when you're like plowing fields, those ground rodents will not have a home. So they move to where the food is, which is usually cities, and then they make contact with a rat, and then the plague is spread, and then they spread to humans. So, in 1347, from 1345 to 1347, there were a series of really bad volcanic eruptions that released sulfur and raised like the overall temperature of the world. And because of this, there was a decrease in vegetation. And so these ground rodents had no food. So where did they move? Towards cities where there's food. And so it began in Asia and the Middle East with big outbreaks in Damascus and probably Cairo. And we're thinking, okay, that makes sense. The Tibetan marmots, right? Central Asia. It's over there. It's in Asia. It's in the Middle East. There's lots of trade. There's lots of interaction. How does it get to Europe? So, people at the time, right? They don't understand germ theory. They don't understand bacteria. They don't understand that it's rodents doing this, right? So people thought that it was caused by what we would call a humoral imbalance in the ocean. And if you guys are unfamiliar with humoral theory, it's basically the idea that was kind of like central to medieval medicine for like hundreds and hundreds of years. It comes from Galen, the Roman Dr. Galen. And basically there are 4 humors. There's blood, choler, black bile, and phlegm. And those 4 kind of like fluids are present in every human being and every like creature on earth basically. And that is what controls your health, and you have to balance your humors or else you'll be sick. I can make a whole video on humoral theory because I find that fascinating. But So people believed that the plague was as a result of a humoral imbalance in the sea, or that there was some kind of astrological alignment that caused plague, or that the volcanic eruptions were the opening up of the earth and spewing evil up and spewing things that would disrupt the earth's humors, basically. So they didn't really know what was going on, and you can't really blame them. Then during the siege of Kaffa, from 1345 to 1347, right when those volcano eruptions were happening, the Mongols allegedly, right, according to what people said at the time, flung corpses into the city of Genoa, right? Or not city Genoa. What city was it? My notes do not specify what city the Mongols allegedly were flinging dead bodies over, but the Mongols were attacking some kind of city with a large Italian population. And this is, again, not really, we have like no evidence of this, but this is what people thought was going on. There's no evidence of like human bodies being used for biological warfare because people didn't understand that bacteria was a thing. So, these Mongols were allegedly throwing corpses over the wall, and the Genoese and the Venetians that were inside the walls got sick. They went home and they spread it to people. That is what people at the time thought was going on. Obviously, that is not true. So what had actually happened was that there was a lot of crop failure that year because of the volcanic eruptions. In that period of a couple of years, lots of crop failure, right? So people are starving. So as soon as the siege ends, right, people are like, okay, we gotta distribute some grain. So they get all this grain together, right? And what do we think found its way into the grain? What kind of animal wants to eat little grains? And, just have a nice steady food source in a grain silo. Rats. Who do you think the rats have been rubbing all up on? Mountain rodents, right? So we've got these plague-infected rats in the grain that these Italian merchants are then exporting all over the Mediterranean, and the effect is absolutely heinous. So, again, the Mongols really had nothing to do with it because they were not flinging bodies over the city wall. So that is kind of our overview of the Black Death, and I think that this is super interesting. And of course, people thought it was like a punishment from God, like they thought that God had kind of been sent to punish them for their transgressions. And this was just not a very good time, to be a human being in the medieval world, because you've got plague, you've got the 100 Years' War going on and off, you've got crop failure, you've got starvation, and it's also important to note that the plague did not just go away. Like it went away. It would kind of skip generations, so whoever survived the first outbreak was more likely to survive another one because they'd built immunity. But there was a wave, I want to say in the later 1300s, that killed a lot of the population of children and young people because they were born in that generation that had never been exposed to the plague. So because of that, you have sort of alternating generations that are just getting wiped out because they don't have any concept of, why is this happening? How can we prevent it? And people thought that bad smells were what caused illness. So that is where the plague doctor masks come from, with the stuffed herbs in the nose to smell good. They thought that basically just foul smelling air made people sick. No, And they also thought that touching people who had the plague would make them sick, and that's actually not how it works. The plague is not really spread by like airborne pathogens or like physical touch, because it's an animal to human disease. I believe that's called zoonotic, I want to say. I don't remember. So like it's not possible. Like, it is possible for humans to spread it to each other, but you have to like be like breathing in someone's mouth, and like, but like if someone has like the nasty like pustules and like like swellings and stuff on their lymph nodes, and you touch one, you're not gonna get sick. It was just such a widespread thing that like everyone was exposed to it, and it wasn't even necessarily because of touch. And they thought the same thing about leprosy. They thought that like touching lepers would give you leprosy, and like we know now that I don't remember what leprosy is called in the modern day. It has a different name. It's not called leprosy anymore. I want to say Hansen's disease, maybe. Also, if y'all haven't tried this Trader Joe's vanilla lip mask, this is the bomb. So, yeah. Anyway. So people thought that lepers would infect them by touching people. And because of this, lepers were treated really terribly. They were kind of like exiled from their communities and sent to live in like the streets, like their families abandoned them. And that's what people were doing during the Black Death. Also, I cannot overstate how detrimental this was to everything, to the economy, to people's livelihoods, to just obviously, we've all been through a global pandemic. We know how hard that was, and we have modern medicine. We have vaccines and medicine and doctors who actually understand the human body. These people had nothing. These people were thrown into this horrible disease, and they had no idea where it was coming from, and they were trying as hard as they could to figure out why this was happening to them. And of course, it's not their fault. They don't know. So it opens a lot of very interesting conversations about how like the church reacted, and how like individual families reacted, and all that. I'm trying to find my notes on medicine because I wanted to talk a little bit about humoral theory in this video, because I feel like it makes sense to talk about it in the same sort of role. So we've got Galen, like I said, and so humoral theory, right? Like I said, everything is made up of blood, choler, black bile, or phlegm. And there's obviously 4 elements: air, fire, earth, and water, and each of the 4 humors corresponds with an element. So you've got air and blood, fire and choler, earth and black bile, water and phlegm. And then you've also got combinations of hot, cold, wet, and dry. So you've got air and blood, which is hot and wet. You've got fire and choler, which is hot and dry. You've got earth and black bile, which is cold and dry. And then you've got water and phlegm, which is cold and wet. So human beings were made up of these humors, right? And these dictated everything from your health to your disposition to your personality to the type of illnesses that you were more likely to get, to the type of treatment that you need for those illnesses, right? So your complexion is the mixture of humors in an individual body, and that balance is, like I said, an individual thing. So it's a very personalized system. So imbalance or damage or decay of these humors is illness, and it is the physician's job to figure out that person's ideal balance and treat it based on that. So we were given examples in class, and I'm going to try to remember, but I don't really know if I am going to get this right. But I believe that like very angry people were said to have like an excess of blood, like, or like very like overly passionate or like overly emotional people were said to have too much blood, right? And that is a hot and wet aspect. So for treatment, you could either bloodlet, which is like the cutting of the skin to release bad blood, to release that excess of blood that you have, or you would go to because blood is a hot and wet element, you would go somewhere cold and dry to balance it out, or you would consume medicine associated with cold and dry. Does that make sense? Obviously scientifically incorrect based on the information we have now, but this is how they treated everything back then. So age, sex, and location are all factors to take into consideration for balance and diagnosis and treatment. So that's your kind of crash course on humoral theory there. And again, that came out of Galen and his Ars Medica, which was kind of like a common core curriculum for like medical students at the time, which I can make a whole video talking about medieval universities because they're fascinating. And then lastly, what I want to talk about was the theory of contagion. And this is what I was talking about, the understanding that illness spreads through touch, not through bacteria and germs. So they thought that the actual physical contact, the act of making contact with a sick person, is what got you sick. They didn't associate it with germs because how could they? And then, okay, like I said, air quality or miasma are bad smells that cause humoral imbalance. And these are treated with incense, gardens, and perfume. And also water quality was considered to be a very big cause of illness. So obviously, I mean, it kind of makes sense if you don't know what germs are. You're like, oh, the air smells bad and I'm breathing it in. So that smell is going into my body, so that must make me sick, you know? And they're not really too far off with the water. Like, having bad quality water will make you sick because of bacteria. But obviously, they don't know that it's bacteria. They just know bad water went into my body, upset the humors, you know? So we have to be aware that there's a certain level of disconnect between what we know and what they know. Like, obviously, if you're inhaling air that has, like, a bunch of chemicals in it, or, like, for example, like, is, like, sulfurous and, like, just unclean, yeah, you're probably not going to feel super great. And they thought it was because of smell, whereas it's actually obviously because of, like, pathogens and bacteria. So there's that. And like I said, it was the same with lepers. Like, people just assumed that they were going to die if they touched a leper. And, yeah. So that's kind of my little spiel on medieval medicine. I think that medieval medicine is fascinating. It's one of my favorite things to learn about, and I love the plague. Kind of a strange thing to say, but I love the plague. I think it is so interesting. I think it's really interesting to see how humanity reacts to these horrible tragedies. Because it's so humanizing. I feel like being so frightened of what will happen to you and your family and the whole world around you is a very humanizing experience, and it's an unfortunate one, and it's scary and it's unpleasant, but I feel like it's something that bridges that gap between so many centuries of time and space. Like, I personally have lost family members to COVID, and I have just kind of, and I feel like a lot of people my age especially were really struggling with the lockdown and the quarantine of it all. And so I just kind of bring some comfort, or I feel some comfort knowing that I didn't know what was going to happen to myself, my family, or the rest of the world. I didn't know when it was going to stop, or how bad it was going to get, or, you know, what was going to happen. It was a very scary time for everybody. And so knowing that this has been like a constant of human existence is both very unfortunate to learn about because, we don't like to know that other humans are suffering, right? Like, I feel like that's a pretty common thing. Like, hopefully, most of us are uncomfortable with the idea of other humans feeling fear or pain or, dread or sadness. But it is interesting and it is important to recognize patterns like that and to, I think it's important to remember that even though these people lived centuries ago, like, they were still people and they still had very complicated lives and they had feelings and they had culture and they lived whole lives, And I feel like that sort of realness gets lost when you study history, which is ironic because the whole point of history and the humanities is to try and humanize and to learn about people. And I think that it just, unfortunately, in the way that it is set up, it kind of it distances us from ourselves in a way, if that makes sense. That is a completely off-topic ramble, but got like really sad. But I feel like this is something that's important to me, so I wanted to talk about it. So yeah, human beings have always been fighting disease, and I just think I'm so grateful that we have vaccines and that we have antibiotics and that we have anesthesia. Just like these things that you take for granted that people a few hundred years ago never had the luxury of, using or having access to. So, all I'm gonna say to wrap up this video is don't feed the fucking prairie dogs, okay? Don't do it. I know they're really cute and they're kind of fat. Don't feed them, okay? And if you come into contact with a prairie dog, right, and you start to feel a little sick, go to the hospital because the plague is very, very treatable with antibiotics. You wait a couple days, you'll probably die. I hate to fearmonger, but it's true. Don't feed the prairie dogs. Go to the hospital, and for the love of God, if your health allows, get all the vaccines you can get. Protect yourself, protect others, be aware of people who are immunocompromised. Fuck it, wear a mask to the doctor's office. Nothing wrong with keeping each other safe. And, yeah, just stay away from marmots and, squirrels and things. So, yeah. Thank you for listening to me rant, and I hope it wasn't too boring. So, yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.